everyone to a very special episode of American Joyride. Today we are joined by former Marine sniper and contractor Zach Benton. Zach, thanks for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for reaching out and having me on.
Well, you're guest number two, so you have a historic spot in the American Joyride lineup. And first, right off the bat, why the Marines? What drew you to the United States Marine Corps?
I think they just, I guess, did better marketing than the others. The cool uniforms. My uncle was a Marine in Vietnam. I had grown up hearing his stories. He was a sniper in Vietnam and died when I was about 4, and so I kind of idolized him. I grew up listening to all of the things about him, and we may dive into a little bit of that as we talk about Naked and Afraid later, if you want to. But that was
Absolutely.
where I knew I didn't want to do college, right? Like I hated school, but I was super athletic. I liked that side, but not enough to go play D1 football anywhere. So yeah, I decided to join those ranks and take my chances in the world.
So were you accustomed to shooting guns when you got to the Marine Corps? Was it something that you've done a lot of, or did you kind of have to learn from scratch what that's all about?
No, I knew I was very comfortable with guns. My dad was a police officer, sitting on our porch. I grew up on 3,300 acres, and the
Wow.
pastime was we had a BB gun, and we would sit on the porch, and we would cut Coke cans in half. And so we would shoot them and just hand off the BB gun every other round. As I was probably 4 or 5 years old, learning to shoot. And when the can fell, we'd put up another one. And that was, we didn't have internet, right? It was 1990. So I was very comfortable behind the rifle.
Was there any part of when you joined the Marines that you found out you weren't very comfortable with? Basic training, perhaps, maybe guys screaming at you. Was there anything that kind of shook you at first?
Oh, for sure. When I, oh, let me think. Probably the first time that I really thought, what the hell did I do? I got to infantry school, and they had us all line up in ranks and said, and kind of did like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 down the front rank. And they're like, all the twos step forward. And I was like, oh God, here we go. Like you never want to, you learn in boot camp, you never volunteer for anything. You just want to be wallpaper as much as possible. It's never good. And it wasn't. I got selected to be a part of the guard unit at SOI at Camp Pendleton. And what that meant was for the next 3 weeks, I would be standing an 8-hour post, 8 hours on, 8 hours off by myself in about a 3 by 8 painted box in front of one of the armories for the School of Infantry. And that sucked. And it also felt like had got left behind because my friends from boot camp had all come through and they were moving on and went to their company and went through infantry training and then on to their units. And here I am in this shitty guard unit that nobody wants to be a part of. That the corporal or sergeant that ran it were just bitter bastards. And yeah, I actually like would stand there and just imagine how well I might do in Mexico and for how long. Uh, it was that was the first time I was like, what the hell did I do? And really, really regretted it. But for the most part, my time in the Marine Corps, I've I've jived well in a team environment, and so I find my people. I'm fairly athletic. They put a stupid amount of value or emphasis on physical ability. If you can do 25 pull-ups, suddenly you're a leader, which is absurd. But I went doing 27, and so you kind of you float to the top because that's presumed to make you a better person, but it's a jaded concept.
Well, it's funny you mentioned those postings. So the Marine Commandant or the head of the Marine Corps has that house in Washington, D.C. I live in D.C. When you walk
Okay.
past it, no matter the time of day, they got two of those little things. And there's two guys, usually young looking guys, hanging out in there. So I know exactly what you're talking about when you refer to that. At what point did you decide? Because I assume you didn't just sign up for the Marines. You're like, I'm now a sniper, right? Like there had to be some transition to that. Is that correct?
For sure. My uncle's history kind of planted the seed. I had always been interested in that route. I didn't really know what it meant or how to achieve it. But my first deployment, I ended up deploying about 2 months after I got to my unit. And so that was really fast. But when I got back, or let me rephrase, I ended up deploying about 2 months after I got to my unit. And about halfway through that deployment, it sucked. I was a boot. I was a new guy. We were in Iraq. It was '04, just working our asses off. And I look over and I see these two guys with rucks and long guns, and they're just walking off into the distance. There's nobody yelling at them. There's nobody policing them over uniform nonsense. They had their own gear. They look completely out of place. And no one says a word to them anywhere they go. And I'm like, who are these guys? Like, that's the sniper team. Two dudes by themselves just walking into a city where we were doing raids at like 30-man platoons. And I was like, I got to do that. I got to get out of this squad with a bunch of bootlicking idiots and do my own thing. I would feel far safer making my own decisions than following the advice of someone who, got a degree at University of Phoenix and decided to join the Marine Corps as an officer. And so that was kind of where that decision was made. And when I got back, I went over and we were convoying to Al Assad to fly home. And I asked if anyone knew where the sniper platoon was at. And I went over to that 7-ton where they were all sitting and was intimidated and terrified. I think a lance corporal at the time, and just knocked on it and climbed up and asked if I could talk to one of them. And was like, how do I do what you do? And he said, when we get back, we'll run an indoc. And if you want it, there's your shot. And so when I got home, I actually caught a lot of flack from my friends. We had, 7 months in Iraq, everybody was partying, everybody was drinking, and I was running the mountains and trying to do what I could to get out of the platoon. And it was a weird sense of betrayal. It's like, you guys are my friends. I love you guys, but you know that this is my goal. And they were supportive. The friends that were truly my friends were 100% on board, and they would goat me and try to get me to come out. But once I put my foot down, they never asked again. And so that was it. I took the NDoc, passed it, and 2 weeks later, they sent me to sniper school, and I didn't know a damn thing. I didn't even bring enough underwear to get to the first week. I was like, there's no freaking way I'm getting through this school. But pulled it off.
Let me rewind real quick to that first deployment in '04 where you just I forget, how'd you refer to yourself? As a regular Marine? You're just an infantry Marine?
Yeah, I was just 0311 infantry Marine, first deployment.
And so this is '04. So for the viewers, what's the ground like in Iraq in 2004?
I mean, we paved our own way for the most part. We actually flew into Kuwait and we loaded up into trucks and we drove across the border. And it was about probably a week and a half of sitting in the back of a 7-ton. They didn't have armored vehicles back then either. These were regular trucks. And so we were sitting in the back of a 7-ton. We would put all of our packs in the center of the truck bed and we would sit on them and face outboard with our rifles leaned against the sidewall of the truck. And that was how we rolled from Kuwait all the way to Aruba. I think we went like through Baghdad, Fallujah area, and then hung a left and went out west. And I mean, the only differences that they knew, because these are some of the first troops that Iraqis were seeing in some of the areas. And the only thing that they could tell was the digis are Marines and the other camis are Army. And from what they would tell us, based off of that, they would pick who they would attack. And the Army units all around us were getting lit up and we drove through without a shot fired. It's kind of disappointing, honestly.
Really? Like, were you hoping to get after it right away?
Oh, hell yeah. Like, that's the whole point. That is what we are just programmed to be hungry for. And we wanted it. We wanted to test ourselves in battle. I mean, it'd be like going to football practice every day and never playing a game. And so we were ready to play a game and test ourselves against the enemy. And they weren't interested, not on the insert anyway. And so we ended up out at this area. It inevitably was called Korean Village. It had a different name when we got to it, but it was just blown out buildings in the middle of the desert. There was like an odd cul-de-sac of houses. I mean, literally in the middle of nowhere. You could look and it was flat, dry desert ground. You could probably see for 10 miles. There was nothing out there. And the buildings were all full of rubble. And so we had been sleeping on the ground all week anyway, because we would just drive until they'd have to stop and we'd jump out of the truck, sleep on the ground, jump back the next day and get back on the road. So we drug all of our mats outside and we slept outside. And the next morning, we counted 10 mortars were stuck in the ground around that complex. And I don't know if they didn't pull pins or they didn't do whatever, but I'm walking around to take a piss and I'm just seeing all these fins that are stuck in the ground. And I, call somebody. I didn't know what they were, and they were mortars. We had been mortared in the middle of the night, but none of them detonated.
What are the odds of that? That's
I
wild.
Yeah, yeah. My whole existence has been a lot of really odd, close calls like that.
Yeah, well, it doesn't get much closer than 10 mortar rounds dropping, none of them exploded. So before you get back from that deployment, did your unit see much combat eventually, or was it a pretty uneventful from a combat standpoint deployment?
The majority of that deployment was not combat. The majority of it we spent on the Jordanian border. My platoon alone, we were helping with customs. We were enforcing arbitrary nonsense laws that the government had been passing to try to boost the Iraqi economy. And I had no understanding of it at the time, but it was pretty shitty, really. They would outlaw you going into Iraq and buying gas, cigarettes, alcohol, produce, whatever, and then taking it across the border to Jordan to sell it for more than you bought it for, because the economies in those countries were very different. And so we worked that border checkpoint in Erbil, I believe is what it was called. I think that's what it was called. But yeah, that was the majority of that deployment until the push through Fallujah happened. And so my unit was part of the initial push through Fallujah that we called Operation Just Kidding, because for 2 or 3 weeks, we did raid after raid, house search after house, just working our way to Fallujah until we surrounded the city, because it's all surrounded by real rural farms. And so it would be these little pockets of villages, and we just sort of sweep it all and drive all the combatants into Fallujah. And then we made a big circle, and we were, hey, tomorrow morning we're going to hit the city. Get ready. And they made us all re-sign our wills and fill out our last testaments and call our families before we do this big hit. And then we sat there for like 4 days. And we had to dig fighting holes because, the Marine Corps is not going to let you just sit. So just grab your e-tool and start digging. And there was a big fighting hole about every 10 feet all the way around this city for however many miles that was. And they'd give us one bottle of water and one MRE a day because they ran out of supplies. And we sat there for 4 days till Bush called it off. And we were all pretty upset, but that's why we called it Operation Just Kidding.
So that when did the big battle of Fallujah happen? So that was after that, is what you're saying.
Yes, yes. We ended up rotating back home. I was with 2-7, and I believe 3-7 and or 3-4 came in and did the actual push. And there was a lot of units that did that push through Fallujah that did the actual hit on the city. But we were in a swap with that battalion in 29 Palms. And so we went home and they went over and they actually did the sweep through the city.
Gotcha. So let's go back now. You're back in the U.S. You're in sniper school. The audience has got to know what consists of sniper school. What are you doing to become a deadly shooter?
They are testing your mental acuity at an extreme level, as well as trying to break you every day. And it was 11 weeks long. I went from about 170 pounds to 140. If you don't run everywhere that you go, you will get thrashed. If you don't, I mean, anything. It's sometimes just at the end of the day, because it's a day that ends in Y. They're just going to thrash you for 2 hours, and you become numb to it. Like your body adjusts, right? You get to a point where there's nothing that they can really throw at you. You just turn your brain off and say, what do? I do a wall sit for 4 minutes while he holds these, ammo cans out. All right. Like I'll just go to muscle failure. You can scream all you want. It doesn't make my legs work any better. Like, but if you don't quit, that's the button that they're looking for. They're looking for you to ring that bell and quit. And so it was long, and that was where I learned that I wasn't stupid, because I was not a good student in school. I did not like academics. I had a girlfriend that did my homework and a football coach that would switch me from classes I was failing. And that was how I got through high school. But once you applied the the application of, hey, this will save your life. This is the skill set and the job that you want to have. You want to have the title Marine Sniper, get your nose in the book and learn it. And it's really just weaponized math. And I did kind of like math. And so we didn't have the Kestrel. We didn't have all the ballistic drop formulas that we have now. We had a calculator and a pencil, and we learned the formulas and we would draw them out and write them out. And if your definition was not verbatim, it wasn't like, explain to me what the mission of a Marine Corps Scout Sniper is. No, you had to recite it by definition. If one word was wrong, the answer was wrong. And that was where I learned to study and make sure that I did it right.
Was there any point of sniper school where you thought I might not be able to get through this?
Um, there were points that I didn't know if they were going to let me. Uh, I mean, I wasn't great at land nav. I was a boot and I was in the desert. And so, it was very different going to Camp Pendleton in the spring. You can't just gaze off into the sunset and spot the marker for land nav. Like, no, you got to walk on it almost. And so that was a big challenge. And really the key thing that happened to me was there were 4 guys from Det 1, and Det 1 is like tip of the spear, tier 1 level asset. And those guys were there for sniper school. Super great, very intelligent, very friendly. They didn't wear the ranks, or didn't behave with rank the way that most of the Marine Corps did. And the instructors did not mess with them nearly the way that they messed with everybody else. And so on our FX week, FX is the final exercise. It's the very last week of sniper school. It's called Hell Week. You do 5 days of missions back to back to back to back, day or night. You do not stop, and you get 1 meal to last you the week. And so night 1, this is day 1, we had to set up a hide in the same building of a mountain town that those guys had. And they went to the instructor Hooch and they're like, hey, we just want to do a recon of this building, check it out, and figure out how we want to set up our hide. And they're like, yeah, cool, do whatever you want. Well, my dumbass said, well, if they can do it, let's go too. We're going to the same building. Like, let's go recon this building and see what we can do. Well, I did not have the same clout, I suppose, that those dudes did. And so I took my team over there, and we were, looking at the building and figuring out, can we get through these sewer lines? Or because they have a whole city that's built just for these trainings. And the instructors found us down there and accused us of being integrity violators. And that's a big deal. If you are an integrity violator, not only do you get kicked out of school, but when you get back to your unit, you get kicked out of your unit. So that was the end of all the work. And it's Hell Week after 11 weeks. And so they bring us back and they said, you can accept 24 hours of straight thrashing, or you can go to the staff in COYC and plead your case. But know that every one of the cadre are going to recommend you be dropped for integrity violation. And I told him, eat a dick. I'm gonna go talk to the staff and CO. Like, I'm not doing 24 hours of thrashing. But my teammates, one of them was already a retread. He had failed once before. The other one had gotten in quite a bit of trouble during the school and had faced getting dropped already. And so they kicked both of them out, and they basically cornered me and said, you're the only reason that this option's even on the table, because you haven't messed up the way that those guys have yet. If you go, I promise you, those two will be dropped. You're the only one that stands a chance in front of the staff sergeant if y'all go. So be aware, if you put your foot down on this, you're condemning your buddies. And that was the perfect card to play, right? Because I'm just like, oh, no. And so we took it, man. We took 24 hours of hazing, really. And the instructors took watch. They took 2-hour shifts throughout the night, and it started because they still had other stuff to do with the other teams. It started with us going up and down the Reaper, which is a mountain that you do in the Crucible at boot camp. It is like a 45-degree angle for probably 2 or 3 miles. I don't know how long it is. It's a massive, massive mountain that when you get to the top, you're supposed to, be a Marine. Well, we did it in sniper school 6 times up and down in about 3 hours with 5-gallon water jugs in both our hands. and and a ruck on our back, and they made us put chem lights in our hats, and we're trying to game it like we'd get just out of sight and dump a bunch of stuff in the ditch and try to run. And the Mars or the Det 1 guys were at the top of the mountain as the radio relay, and he's like, hey man, just signal to me and I'll signal back, because they also timed us, and every time we went we had to do it faster. And so, I mean, it was creating the impossible task.
Right.
And that was how it started, the 24 hours. It was, I didn't know if I was going to get through that. At the time, I didn't know what rhabdo was. And so how none of us ended up with that, I don't know. But yeah, it was brutal.
What's that, rhabdo?
Rhabdo, it's kind of a short, it happens in CrossFit a lot, where people work so hard that they break the muscle down, that the toxins from that broken down muscle get into their bloodstream and actually poison them. And so I didn't know what that was back then. I have friends that are in CrossFit, and so I kind of learned about it. And I've always thought back, I was like, I don't know how we didn't get sick as hell, because each instructor that wakes up at 2 a.m. to do his turn thrashing wants you to remember him.
Right.
Right.
They all want to give you their best shot.
Oh yeah, man. And we were glazed. Our eyes, we were done. I think I held the push-up position for 3 hours during one set of it. They let us get out of it twice to do 10 jumping jacks and 10 flutter kicks, and then it was right back in while they're interrogating, right? Like they're putting you through kind of a miniature sear. But it was brutal. Yeah.
But you get through, you become a Marine Corps sniper, you've graduated to that level in life. How quickly between the graduation were you back overseas?
I think I graduated in March and I deployed in September.
So what is that, about
not
6 months?
long.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Is this going back to Iraq?
Yes. After that, my next 2 deployments as a sniper were both in Fallujah.
And let's talk about that a little bit. A lot of the people watching this, really young, maybe weren't even alive when the Iraq War started. Certainly, many of them weren't old enough to remember it. And I want to dig into that because you're the first sniper from Iraq that I've ever interviewed. So, what was it like being on the ground in Iraq in a sniper's role? Just give us a brief overview of what that entails.
Well, for my first deployment as a sniper, I was attached out permanently to one of the companies in the battalion's AO. And so we were just south of the city across the bridge. I believe it was called Fob Black. And it's kind of like being thrown into a city full of people that don't speak your language, of a different culture, given guns and saying, hey, go find the enemy. We didn't know where they were. And so the only indicators that we had to work off of is where are they blowing people up at? And it's the major highways or the major intersections or it's things like that. And so I had a 4-man sniper team at the time, and it was they're setting IEDs along this road in this section. I was like, okay, I will go out there and try to keep an eye on that road. We did a lot of Overwatch and a lot of just hunting people putting in IEDs and trying to catch them do that because they weren't interested in a gunfight. And
Right.
who blames them, right? Like we have all the resources. We've got air assets. We've got 50 cals, rockets. Like you're stupid to get into a gunfight with us when you have the option to just push a button, blow us up, and walk home and live another day. And so that's what they did. And as a sniper, it was real frustrating to try to catch these guys and figure them out because they're small towns, they're villages. Everybody knows everybody. And so, yeah, I would live in the village with them for usually about a week at a time. I'd pick a number of houses that had visibility of that portion of the road and take a turn and knock on the door and live with the family for, a couple of days and then move around and try to find another one. And, you tell them, don't tell anybody. You try to keep quiet. You try to keep your head down. But anytime there's a change in the pattern of life, the neighbors know. Right. And so, um, I don't know how covert we actually were. Probably not very, but that's what we
And,
did. And
and were the families like, were they receptive? Like, were they okay with you living in their home? Did they put up a fight? Like, how did that all work?
for the most part, they were open to it. I think partly because they didn't have an option. But I tried to build relationships with them because I'm not into having my throat cut in my sleep either. And
Right.
so I would talk to them. I took a Arabic dictionary. I became the translator in my team, and was pretty proficient at speaking Arabic at the time. And find out what they needed. They always need money, right? And so I would carry a couple $100 each mission and pay them for letting us stay or feeding us. That was a big one. They'd always feed us, which was super nice, and they don't have much. But medications was a big one. Just bringing them a bottle of Advil like brought tears to their eyes because they don't have access to that or they didn't at the time. And so pain management, one of the guys at the houses that I stayed at pretty regular had either a clubbed foot or some type of an injury and could hardly walk. And so I would bring him pain medication and would sit up and just talk to them and get to know them. And they were just like us. They were just like everybody else. Once when people are looking, they're all doing their 5 daily prayers. And when nobody's around, he's asking for nudie magazines and cigars, right?
Right.
So it's no different.
Have interviewed some people that talk when they talk about Iraq, they really talk with kind of great sympathy for the general population of Iraq, and they felt like they kind of got thrown into a situation that wasn't their fault, but they just got caught because of Saddam. Sounds like you kind of feel the same way that these weren't bad people. The bad guys were the bad guys, but the general Iraqi population, they just wanted to probably be left alone. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. That was pretty prevalent in what I saw as well. The people were very hospitable. You know, like anything, there's extremists that take Christianity too far or whatever religion and try to use it for power or for dominance or whatever it is that they can do to benefit themselves. But the majority of people want to work and provide for their families and raise their kids and leave behind a legacy of to their family, and that's how they were. And when accidents happen, which they did, and innocent people are killed because they're just in the wrong place at the wrong time during a war, it was tragic and it was sad for us as well.
So when it comes to the bad guys now, what are your rules of engagement in a situation like this? Because like you said, you're looking for people who are planting bombs. They're not just walking down the street with AKs firing into buildings, right? So how are you told, like, if you see X, you are automatically clear to engage? What did you need to see before you could take a shot at someone?
Well, the ROEs kind of changed. They were dynamic, right? They weren't set, and it would change with whatever regimental commander came in, or a lot of times the enemy TTPs or their tactics and procedures. And so, based off of what they were doing, most of it was IEDs. So there was a time where if you're digging in the road, you're going to get shot. A shovel on the side of the road is green light, put him down. They weren't walking around with AKs, because that was another one. AKs had mostly been taken away. A lot of them were, for a while when we were doing the raids, you could have one AK per household, and it had to stay in your home. You couldn't be patrolling around the village with your weapon, but you could keep it for home defense. So if you saw anybody with a weapon, it was pretty much a green light, unless they were in a uniform. And so that was mostly it, like looking for people. And they learned the ROEs real quick too, because if yesterday they could dig in the road and today they can't, so one dude's head explodes and the whole village knows don't dig in the road, right? And
It
so
makes perfect sense. Yeah.
yeah, right. The one precarious time that I was worried about that was my first deployment. I was still an infantry guy. We were doing raids in Aruba, and the children would stone the hell out of us. We would drive into the city, and mobs of 30 to 50 kids would start throwing bricks. And they'd hit the trucks. They would hit us. If we were on a foot patrol, you're dodging bricks being thrown through the air as you're trying to walk. And it's real hard to keep a mental picture of, where threats might be coming from while there's a constant volley of stones coming at you. And they wouldn't let us engage for rocks, but there was one day they started shooting bottle rockets and threw a Molotov cocktail. And when we got back that night, we sat down with the CO and were like, hey, if they're throwing Molotovs, like, we have to be able to do something. And so they had a big meeting. They called in the sheik of the village or whatever and was like, hey, you got to get these kids to stop doing that. He's like, I can't make them stop throwing rocks. And he's like, fine, but if they throw another Molotov, we're going to shoot them. And when we rolled back to the city, I'm like, oh God, like, I'm going to have to kill a kid today. But they never threw another one. They stoned the hell out of us. And I leveled the playing field by calling my mother and asking for 4 slingshots and about 100 marbles. And my uncle added in a box of 50 caliber lead balls because he was into black powder rifle shooting. And so the next mission, when after those came in, we were in the back of a high back, and when you just start hearing ting, 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 boom, like big rocks hitting the trucks, and the mob of kids all coming, because there were all of the rocks had gone unanswered at this point. And I look at my buddy and he looks at me, and we load these slingshots and we come up over the back of the high back and draw back and drill these 2 kids from probably 15 feet in the chest with a marble with a wrist rocket. And they drop to the ground and the whole crowd just disappears. Right. And it was game on. It was game on after that. We put good work to those slingshots and kept them at a much greater distance. It was fun.
That's awesome. That's a wild and unique story. So I know when we were previously talking before we did the interview, we were exchanging some emails, and I believe you said that there was one incident where you guys got into a pretty significant gunfight. They ended up hanging the guy. Is that right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So let's break that down for us.
Sure. That was my 3rd tour. I was working up. This was a mission up near Lincoln. Lincoln was an MSR, a big road up northeast or northwest of Fallujah. And it had a massive canal on the north side of this road. The road ran east to west, and there was a big canal, water canal, that was about 600 meters north, and the whole hill just kind of went up until it got to that canal, and then it was a big mound, like 20 feet from there. But it all kind of flowed down toward the road. It was about 600 yards. And they were doing an engineer sweep of that road because Lincoln was a big one. They'd been hit. I had shot some people earlier that deployment, had called for fire early on that deployment for some IED activity on that road. And we were just supposed to overwatch between the engineers sweeping the road so that nothing got put in behind them or in front of them, to plan to hit the guys. And the insert was totally botched with the infantry company that did it. We requested to be inserted about 3 miles from my position. And instead, they drove straight to my position and stopped and said, "You're here." And I got out. It was dark, obviously. I get out. I'm like, all right, let's jump in the ditch. And so they would do these safety stops, right? To anyone watching wouldn't know if someone got in or out. And so they do random stops all along whatever route. Well, this stop, we get out, we jump in the ditch, we all hide, and then the convoy keeps going. And I'm looking in my GPS trying to figure out, is this, if this is our insert point, we should have, 5 clicks to the right. No, I'm right at my site. I'm right where I'm supposed to be after my insert. And so, like, well, thanks a lot, guys. You literally dropped us off right where we are. And so we went up and made the hide because I couldn't move. My mission was to cover that section of road. I had to be there. And we went up and found an empty pump house. Pump houses are like about a 10 by 10 cinder block building on the sides of these canals where they house the pumps that pump the water out and down into the field. So we're hiding in there. We're kind of watching the road, and about 9 or 10 in the morning, a sheep herder comes by and peeks in the door from about 30 feet away, 40 feet away, and makes eye contact with one of my buddies and keeps going with his herd. And my buddy looks at me and he's like, "Dude, we got to move." So, okay. So I call in, "Hey, we've been compromised by this guy, request to move positions. We'll just move over, like just down from the wadi and get in the grass. We'll go green side. We'll get in the dirt. We'll dig a hide, whatever." Denied. And so I get back on, like, "No, negative. You understand. We need to move. We've just been compromised. They know that we're here and they know where we are." They're like, "No, your mission is to watch that road. You cannot move. Stay where you are." And I should have ignored it. I should have said, "Roger that," gave them a ghost grid and just moved my team. But I didn't. And I said, okay. And about 3 hours later, 3 vehicles full of people pull up on the road just down the hill from us, and they start trying to rush the hill. They had a PKM or a big machine gun on another section that was just hammering the pump house. And so I was reading a book about Blackwater, ironically, at the time, and the whole sky just opened up into gunfire. And we had this one pump house and one doorway to shoot back through it, and about 15 people, all with fully automatic weapons, shooting at us. And 600 yards, they're not real accurate, but you can hear them, and they're whizzing and they're hitting the building. And we're trying to engage back. What they didn't know was it wasn't just my team. I had another team 500 meters away that was a mutually supported position, and they had taken the 50 cal. And so he had a Sasser, and it was a turkey shoot for them because they weren't being engaged. They were just observing the gunfight. And so they put down all 3 of those vehicles and lit 2 of them on fire with Rofus rounds. Now, a Rofus round has an incendiary compound inside the bullet. So when it hits, it explodes. And so they're having a field day, right? This is the sniper's paradise for them. We were living a nightmare. And I grabbed my flak jacket and I just rolled over in it and kind of just waited to be shot. There was so many rounds coming into that pump house, but it never happened. They did not hit me. And so, a couple seconds go by and I get up and we all start just shooting. I think I was more or less expecting an initial barrage and then it to slow down because I knew they had 600 yards to cover, right? It's like they're not going to do that with this same intensity of fire. And
Right.
so we get up and we're kind of taking turns in this doorway trying to shoot back. And my teammate had a bolt rifle, the A3, the M40 A3. His barrel got shot twice while he was on the gun trying to engage back. He had a through and through on the armpit of his flight suit and another one through the pant leg. And he was never hit. My radio operator, his ruck was full of bullet holes. His toothbrush had been shot in half. He had a vial of holy water that had been shot. His poncho liner was rolled up and it just looked like Swiss cheese when we opened it up. And it took us it was about a 50-minute to an hour long gunfight. And I know that because the other team actually got to record it because they were having a jolly time. but yeah, we fought those dudes off until Cobras got on the station, and they kind of took over, and they ended up gathering up the wounded and dead and threw them into a truck that they hijacked that was just driving down the road. And we were almost Winchester. My whole team was down to their last mag. And so we kind of needed to be much more selective on what we shot with or what we shot at. And at that point in time, they had forfeited and Cobras came on station, and I was like, all right, save your ammo. We all survived this. Like, let's just start doing a, battle damage assessment here. Well, in the middle of that gunfight, it had gotten so bad trying to take turns shooting from that one doorway that I felt I needed to get out of the building. Like, we are far better off if we're all online and everybody can engage. And there had been a fighting hole dug in the ground 10 feet from there that I guess had been used by somebody. It looks like a grave, basically. It's just a hole to fight from. And I told the team, I was like, hey, I'm going to go get in that hole. And they're like, cool, give us a count and we'll cover your movement. I said, okay. So I start at 3, and I'm standing at the back of this pump house getting ready to make my run. Everybody changes up mags. And I was like, 1, 2, and they were going to lean in the door and engage while I went around them. When I said 3, before I could take a step, a tracer flew through the door, hit the wall right at eye level, and fell to my feet, and is still fizzing this red phosphorus fiery shit that makes it a tracer, right? And I completely bit a hole in my underwear. Like, it discombobulated me so bad. I just stopped. I was like, I'm going to need another count. Like, give me a minute. And we all kind of started laughing. And I was like, oh my God, I was 1 second from walking into that. And we all kind of dumped another mag and then reset. And I did it again and ran out. And I, head down and trying to just protect my vitals while moving fast. I dove into this fighting hole and do the kind of, head check. Oh, I'm good. I'm not shot. All right, get in the fight, right? Throw the gun up, start engaging, start looking for guys that are making it up the hill toward us at this time. And all I can smell is shit. And my initial thought is I'm gut shot, right? Like, because you don't always feel it. Like, you hear these stories, you don't always know that you've been shot. And so I'm feeling around and like, fuck, like, did I shit my pants? Did I get, where is this wound at? Because I can't find it and I don't feel it anywhere. And I'm consciously trying to find something, nothing. And I look back and my buddy Jeff is shooting from the doorway. And I'm like, hey, why does it smell like shit in here? And he starts laughing and he yells over the gunfire. He's like, I took a shit in there last night. I was like, oh, you bastard. And so I had rolled, like, combat roll into the hole, and I didn't see it because I had my head down in the roll and it just smeared it all down my back.
Oh man.
I was just covered in his shit. And oh, it was a mess. But Cobra's on station, they run the guys off. We start to kind of collect ourselves and look around. They had hit the pump house with an RPG, but it didn't go off. It was dented in and kind of mushroom dented the tip of it, and had fallen to the ground at the base of that pump house, which would have probably killed us all. And so we're walking down the hill. QRF finally shows up. I think the Q in that acronym was not very accurate. They weren't quick at all.
For the audience, QRF stands for Quick Reaction Force. They're supposed to be on standby for a situation like this.
Right. But because they were so afraid of the IEDs on that road, they wouldn't even let QRF drive down it. They made them get out and walk. And so QRF was only like 5 clicks away, but it took them an hour to get to us because the battalion forced them to walk. Which, if I hadn't had another sniper team there, we probably would have lost that one. They were out to get us. But we gathered ourselves, we start walking down the hill, and it's like something out of a movie. There's 3 vehicles on the road, shot full of holes. There's blood everywhere, and clothing and shoes and empty magazines and rifles that they had dropped. And Two of the cars are completely on fire. There's black smoke all up in the air, and it's just like the calm after the storm, right? Like, what just happened here? And we get down there, and the cars are just, full of guns, full of ammunition, full of ordnance, and they've got syringes in all of the cups. And they had shot up something before they had gone, which I don't know what it was, but we'd shoot these guys.
Had to be some kind of adrenaline drug, right?
Some type of amphetamine, I would expect, right? But you'd shoot them, and if you didn't get a good solid hydraulic shot on either the spine or a vital organ that incapacitated them, these guys get right back up. And and I'm looking at my buddy like, what is happening? Zombie apocalypse here. But that's what they were doing. And a couple of hours go by, and we're all kind of decompressed and just waiting on EOD to show up, which always took forever. They're the explosive ordnance detection group that detonate any ordnance that you find or any bombs. And some Marine in a some Marine sitting in a turret calls out our name. He's like, hey, I think I see somebody out here. And he's looking through a thermal optic because it's getting dark. And he sees this guy in a field on the other side, in the other direction from the road, crawling. And I called out to the lieutenant. I was like, we'll go get him. And he's like, no, sniper, stand down. I was like, good call. I'd have murdered that dude in a heartbeat. But they went and captured him and brought him back. He was dressed the same as all the guys that we were fighting. He had taken his shirt off and tried to hide it because they were in black pajama pants and like a white top. And his story was that he had been kidnapped by them and was hiding in the trunk, but escaped during the fight. And I'm just like, hell no,
complete lie.
Oh yeah, like he's not even that good of a liar. And so we had to turn him over. And I ended up a couple of weeks later, I get called in for kind of a side, not a full debrief, but they're like, hey, just FYI for your information, that guy that you guys captured had just been let out of prison in Baghdad by our government. And he was sent back and they hung him this morning. I was like, nice.
Yeah, it's a classic example of play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, that sounds like one intense situation. Is the rolling into the other guy's bathroom experience, is that the funny? I don't want to say funny, but is that the most laugh out loud moment in a serious situation you ever had in the military?
That's probably at the top of us laughing and there being any trace of comedy in a moment that is mostly terrifying, right? Like you're just trying to live as long as you can and hope that one round, because you don't know when it's coming, where it's coming, doesn't dome you and end everything. Because it will happen if you just lay there. Your only chance of surviving is to get up and to fight. Yeah. And so you got to roll the dice, and life of decisions got you in the position. You better perform now.
Right, absolutely. I mean, no. I mean, I've obviously never been in a gunfight before, but logically, what you said about your only option is to get up and fight, that makes perfect sense. Otherwise, bullets are only, you want bullets to be going in both directions in a situation like that, not just towards you. Okay, so I like asking people this question with military background. So whether it's your military career, so for the audience, Zach also did some contracting as well. In your military and contracting career, what's one moment you're most proud of? And then is there any situation where you wish you look back like, man, I wish we could have done that maybe a little differently?
In my contracting time?
Or military or both. One, it doesn't matter.
I think one of the things that I was the most proud of personally was in the selection process for Patriot Group. That was a company that I was working for. It basically doesn't exist anymore now that we've left Afghanistan, but and that vetting was one of the most difficult things that I had done, and predominantly because CQB was not something snipers did. We weren't, you know, a direct action team. We would go through houses, but at the time in '04, like that wasn't something that was taught very well. The only things that I remember doing was they would draw lines in the dirt and be like, this is the building. Now go walk in this direction and turn here. It's like I would just walk in and look where I thought a threat would be and try to work my way through the building. Um, However, when you go to that level for a 3-letter agency and your left and right peers are all Ranger Battalion, they're team guys, they're Force Recon, MARSOC, SF. These guys all do that stuff. Marine snipers don't do that stuff. And so I struggled a lot. I didn't know how to do CQB really. And I spent each night, luckily the guys in the class were super accommodating, and I would generally go to the SEALs because they were real proficient and you could really tell, and be like, hey man, walk me through not what you did but your thought process. I can't mimic you on my own run because they'll just move a wall or they'll move furniture or they'll move the client and it won't work. I need to know why you did it so that I can think through my own problems. And I probably made every mistake there was to make. But their standing rule, more or less, was you can make any mistake once, but if you make it twice, you're gone. And they meant it. We started with like 40, and I think we ended with 8. And that was one of the bigger classes that they had ever had. And I inevitably ended up figuring it out, and it all came down to this one run at the end. And I kind of paused because I had made the wrong decision on the time before it, and I knew I was like, this is my one and my only last shot to get this right, or I'm going home tomorrow. And went through the run and did it the right way. And one of the team guys that was an instructor kind of knelt down over the catwalk and he's like, you understand why you did that? I said, yes, I do. He said, that was the right call. Good job. Go back outside. And that was kind of a pivotal moment because I had left Triple Canopy on bad terms. They had changed the contract, and I was a medic over there, and it was like, you know what, deuces, I'm out of here. Screw you guys. And so Patriot Group was my only option for employment where I wanted to be. I was kind of all or nothing there, and I'm really proud of myself for pulling that off and getting to be a part of that organization.
That sounds badass. And for anyone watching who doesn't know, CQB stands for, correct me if I'm wrong, close quarters battles, correct?
Yes, it's gunfighting in a house.
It's gunfighting in a house. And a lot of people watching this who've seen other interviews have heard that, but for the first time viewer, we of course want you to be educated on that. Is there anything when you look back you wish you had done differently, or are you pretty content with how everything shook out?
Yes. I don't think you get through much of a war with your job pulling triggers without regrets. Um, the lesson that really stuck with me the most was to use the least amount of force possible to get the job done. And that's not something that Marines do. When all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. And when all you have is a rifle, everything's a target. And were there was a time that I wish I had handled that without lethal force, and it was possible to do if I had requested it. I didn't, and I should have, and I think that that stuck with me a great or till today. I wish that that had gone a different way, and a lot of it was because I got to see finally the aftermath, and it was that guy's father crying over his body, and that guy's mother, and the whole village, because we stayed. And you know, the interpreter comes around, is like, these guys are bad guys, who cares? And I was like, well, I get that, and that's fine, but I saw my family in that family. I saw the humanity there on the other side of the battlefield, and I probably could have requested a squad or somebody to come along and handle that a different way, but I didn't. And yeah, so that's the lesson that I think I learned there is if you can and I think that might help some cops too. Like, hey, if you have another option, go about your less than lethal at any time that you can. Just because you have the justification, just because it meets the arbitrary ROE of a guy digging in the road, or whatever they're doing, might not need to kill him. And yeah.
No, that's a good lesson. And thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating. That's why I like to ask. So I know you've talked about previously in this interview, you talked about some tier one guys that you briefly brushed up against in training. I've had the honor and privilege to interview some tier one guys over the years. While on deployments, did you ever cross paths with any tier one like Dev Grew or CAD guys?
No, they didn't come into our area that I was aware of. I did some joint missions with some other units and some other sniper teams. I had been requested by a few other units to support them that needed snipers, but no, I never came into contact with any of those guys.
Nice. Yeah, I just asking. I always like to hear different points of views. Let me scroll down here. All right. So we're gonna move on to the next subject, Naked and Afraid. Now I gotta be honest with you. I know of Naked and Afraid. I can't say I've ever watched a single episode, but the premise seems shockingly simple if you listen to the title of being Naked and Afraid outdoors. How did you end up on a show where you're naked in nature and you're not alone, right? You're with another person, correct?
Oh, you're supposed to be, yeah. Um,
So shake it down for us.
well, so years ago, there's another show called Alone, and I had applied to be on Alone for probably 5 years, and that one is another survival challenge, but it has a prize at the end, like 500,000 to $1 million. Never got the call back. And during COVID, I got on a bender for Naked and Afraid, and I applied online. Didn't think a whole lot else of it. I had actually tried the year prior to apply by a Google search and hit a scam who tried to rip me off for like $300 to handle my B-roll video. And I was like, okay. So in the back of my mind, I kind of thought these were my friends screwing with me again. But I applied online and didn't think anything. And about 6 months later, I guess it would have been January of 21, I get an email from them and they want to talk on the phone. They want to do an interview and they want me to put 10 survival video skills together in a week. And all of this kind of just happened. And I was like, holy shit. Um, okay. And so I'm scrambling to do all these things right before I deploy again. And they more or less are like, you're in the running. We'll keep you posted. Well, I deploy in, I think, Valentine's Day, March or February, at the same time as the snow apocalypse that hit Central Texas.
So that's 2021, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I deploy back over to Kabul and I start, we do a psych eval, or every couple of weeks they'd reach back out for something else. And at this time I'm in full go mode. Like if this happens, I'm gonna be naked on TV trying to survive somewhere, like, and I can't do any prep work in Kabul except read books. So I read 18 books in 3 months to try and prepare for the unknown, right? And ended up being selected, and I left in July. Yeah, I left in about the middle of July, toward the end of July, I guess, and went to Colombia. Um, didn't really know what to expect because of COVID. We didn't have a whole lot of contact with producers. I had done a Skype video or two, but like that could have been anybody. So I'm still in the back of my mind, like, are these my friends?
Yeah. Is
Am
this
I
an
gonna?
elaborate prank that's being pulled on you?
Yeah, yeah, totally. I'm like, did these guys really just pay for me to have a physical done? Like, come on. And so I go to Colombia, and there's this little Colombian man, doesn't speak a word of English, standing at the airport with my name on a piece of paper. Like, oh, here we go. This is the guy that's going to cut out my kidney. And I get in the truck, and we can't really talk because he, one, isn't trying, and two, can't speak English, and my Spanish is abysmal. And so we just sort of sit in silence for probably a 40-minute drive until he pulls into this resort and it's like, adios.
okay. I get out and walk in, and they had my name on a roster and a room number for me to go up to. And I ended up spending 6 days in the resort waiting for my insert. My partner and I were on 2 hour incremental switch off, right? Like I could be out of my room for 2 hours, but she had to stay in hers. And so we had to kind of mediate through one of the producers so that we were never in contact with each other.
Right. Okay. So you're supposed to be complete strangers the
Right,
whole time.
right. And they do a lot to ensure that that maintains. But natural to, the job that I was doing for the agency I was working on, and I was incredibly idle and bored. I had taken some books, but I already read those again 3 times. And so every meal they would come to my room. It's Colombian guy, didn't speak English, whatever, and would hand me a plate, and he would hand me a clipboard with a roster. Now that roster had the names of every person in the resort. And so I was good for like 3 days. And then I couldn't take the temptation anymore, and I was bored as hell. And so I looked at him and I pretended that his pen didn't work. And I was frustrated, right? And I hold up my finger for him to wait. And I step into the bathroom where I had staged my cell phone, and I screenshot that roster. And I come back with a pen and I write my name and I hand it back, and, gracias, have a good day. Well, then it was game on. First marking off all the men's names, then marking off all the Spanish names, then looking for anyone that sounds gringo enough to be in Colombia for Naked and Afraid, right? And I found this woman's name, and I start doing the research, and I'm like, oh my God, she is heinous. Like probably 60 pounds overweight, missing teeth, frizzy hair, total mess. But I'm looking into her background. Her ex-husband is a fireman. I did 5 years of fire and EMS after the fire department, or after the Marine Corps and contracting, between that gap. I'm like, okay. Then she did some security work in Afghanistan because she was in the army. And I'm like, oh God, here we go. And I could see the overlap, right? But I would trade my knife for a shirt if she'd have worn it. Like it was a mess. And so I send the pictures to my wife, and she's like, haha, you deserve it. And like, all right, whatever. Like I need to control my face because I'm really bad at that. And when we have this face-to-face meeting, I need to be prepared for that, because this is going to be awful. Like this is not going to be something that you want to spend 3 weeks naked alone with in the jungle. But what I didn't know was that my partner actually didn't go by her maiden name. That's just what they had written on the thing. She went by another name. And so this was just a random chick that had the same name.
Oh, so you're looking up the wrong person this whole time.
I had the wrong person, but it totally clicked, right? Like all the things made sense. And they have the same name, but she hates that name and doesn't go by it. She goes by her middle name. And had I known that, all of her social media stuff is from her middle name, not her actual first name. And so, yeah, her name was Mildred. Like I'll give you that one, which is not a common name. Like you look up Mildred, you get obituaries. Right. So but anyway. So yeah, after about 6 days, we do the insert. I almost got arrested by the Colombian police for not having a passport on me on my way back from the jungle during one of the interviews. Luckily, production showed up because they were putting me in cuffs and like, we're taking you to jail. And it's like, well, my passport's not there either, so I don't know what you want from me. Like I told you, it's at the hotel. But we started the challenge, and it's a 21-day challenge. Your job is to just survive it, and you're given 4 items. You bring each person brings 4 items to the production, and they give them over, and the production gets to pick what you get, and you figure it out once you meet your partner and you're in the jungle. So we got a knife, a pot to boil water, a mosquito netting, and one of those ferrocerium rods, those fire strikers with a magnesium block. And it was game on. It was about a 3-mile insert, around a big marsh. There's a huge, probably 5 mile circumference, full circumference marsh where all the water collected in this big mountain range. And that was where I stayed. I don't know if you want to throw any questions in there, or I can just keep rolling if you'd like.
No. I've got some for sure. So number one, what do you got to, when you're not wearing clothes in an environment like that, how dangerous is it? Like, do you got plants you got to watch out for? Do you got animals you got to watch out for? Because I wouldn't walk naked through my backyard woodline, let alone a jungle. So what's that like?
Incredibly vulnerable. It taxes your mental capacity for at least the first 2 or 3 days, quite a bit. But after that, you don't even notice anymore. Initially, super weird and just awkward, right? Like I'm not used to stripping down in front of a bunch of strangers. Like, I was in the Marine Corps. You get naked at shower time, but everybody's naked. It's nobody cares. Here, it's just you. Like you're the only one, and there's a whole crew, and they're very very proud of the fact at the time most of the producers were all women. It was predominantly a television show produced by women. For obvious reasons, that was a big deal to them. But uncomfortable as hell for me, right? And so like we pull up in the truck and we're filming. They do a little bit of production for those scenes, and I kind of look at the camera dude and it's like, hey, the camera guy and the audio guy were the only two men. One other guy that was a support, but the people that carried equipment mostly. And I was like, hey, what do I say here? He's like, whatever you want. This isn't scripted. Say whatever you want. It's like, okay. And I just start off this tangent. I'm like, yeah, I've always been real eco-conscious. Anytime you introduce a new species to an environment, you never know what kind of impact it's going to have. And I'm like taking my shirt off as I'm saying this. And but Colombian Mapana, and I look into the camera, which is like the big poisonous viper, they're Mapana viper. I was like, Colombian Mapana, meet the Texas trouser snake. And I pull my pants down. And I don't know if you have ever gone to the bathroom, say at the gym. There's not a whole lot of blood reserves for that area of your body, right? Like your heart's pumping, it's in your shoulders, it's in your legs, and it's not a proud moment. And this was like that. I was very nervous. My heart's pumping, and I make that stupid comment, and I drop pants, and not all of me had come to Columbia. Part of me stayed in Austin that day, and it was not a proud moment. But I just laughed it off. I was like, "Oh God!" And I don't think any of the crew even made a sound. But yeah, man, it's awkward and weird.
So what was it like with the partner then? Like, did you two mesh well? Like, what? I imagine there's tons of conflict. We're in the Marine Corps, right? People probably butt heads all the time. A lot of type A personalities. But now you're naked in the jungle with a woman you don't know from Adam. And with their arguments, how'd that all shake out for you two?
Well, she was only there for about 72 hours. So we didn't have much of an opportunity to fight about anything. She ended up getting sick. The water that we were drinking was pretty muddy, pretty dirty, and tasted pretty strong. And so she didn't want to drink it, which, I can understand. And she got real dehydrated and ended up getting a UTI. And when they gave her antibiotics for that UTI, it just made her even more sick. And so morning on day 4, she left. And
So
so
now
I
you're
did,
alone.
yeah, 17 more days alone.
And did you prefer being alone? Was it easier for you to get stuff done?
Well, there's two sides of that. Part of me did want to do it alone, right? I wanted to know what I am capable of. And if I hadn't had that opportunity, it would have lingered in the back of my mind, and I'd want to do another challenge, and I'd want to do it alone. But since I got to scratch that itch, no, thank you. But The other part of me is, you see a lot. If you, I guess you haven't seen the show, it's pretty common that people fight over 50-50 contribution, which is just not even a realistic expectation, in my opinion. Not everybody is capable of the same things.
Right.
And you can't draw a clear line through all of the tasks and all of the things that have to happen in a survival situation and distribute those tasks evenly. It's impossible to do, but people get wrapped up in, I'm doing more work than you are, you're not doing enough. And inevitably, a lot of times when someone gets hurt, sick, or just feels like they're not carrying their weight, they quit. And I'm like, hey, 99% is still lighter than 100. I don't care if you just lay in that camp and tend the fire. That is one less thing that I will have to do if your ass leaves.
Right.
And because she was sick, she had to go get treatment, get medications, get whatever. There wasn't a whole lot of selling her on that when she's got like a infection, right? But that was my take on it, and I've tried to kind of communicate that to some of the next maybe generation or other people that are going to do that challenge. Like, curb that whole idea. It's impossible. It's not going to happen. Do everything that you're capable of doing and assume that they're doing the same, because 21 days is really not that long. And there's a whole audience that's going to see everything that's happening too. And you don't need to comment on it. You know that you did most of the work, and so did they. They did whatever they could do. So I didn't fight with her about anything. They tried to go at me like, how do you feel that you're doing more work than your partner? It's like, her output's not my responsibility, mine is. And at this point, she's sick, and so I'm doing what I can to be the teammate that I would need. And hopefully when I get sick, she's still here and she can help me.
Would you do it again? Would you go, if you had the opportunity to do it again, would you do it again?
I would.
You would. So it couldn't have been that bad.
In the moment, you're like, absolutely not. I will never do this again. This was awful. But in hindsight, the experience was wonderful. And it really helped reprioritize my life and kind of bring some things into perspective that I think I needed. And it's impossible not to grow from that. Even if you fall off the truck, if all you do is get naked in the jungle and step on a thorn on your way in, there's no way that you didn't step outside of your comfort zone by just accepting the challenge, by getting on that plane, flying to Colombia, meeting a little man that doesn't speak English, driving in the middle of no, like, you are going to be so far out of your comfort zone, you're going to grow as a human if you look for where for it to happen, for where to find those lessons. And I think everyone should do something like that.
I agree with you. It sounds like it was a wild experience. Now I want to pivot to a different subject, maybe a little more fun subject. But you're a gun guy. Is that accurate to say?
Sure.
Okay. So you wake up one morning and Red Dawn is unfolding. You seen the movie Red Dawn?
Which one?
The original. That's the only one where the pretend exists.
I'm glad that was the right answer. Yes.
So you wake up and there's communist paratroopers dropping from the sky. What is your next move?
Oh man. The existence of my family is what makes that a very difficult question to answer. Because if they aren't engaging yet, I don't know yet their intent. If they are engaging, if you can't break contact, the only thing you can do is fight back. And so, through 9 years of contracting, we weren't seeking a gunfight. We were seeking to break contact. That was all.
What is that? I don't know what that means. What does that mean, break contact?
When you have contact with the enemy and engagement with the enemy, it's called contact, right? We have contact from whatever. Breaking contact is to get away. Our whole job is to avoid the fight. If we're stuck in it, we do our thing, we do our job, we're happy to do that. But our mission and our actual responsibility is the client. Now, in my world, that's my son and my wife. My mission is to get them away from all of that. And then I can deal with the threat. And so if I have my family there, my goal is to try to break contact. We are like the kids did, right? They jumped in a truck, they tried to find supplies, they ran to the mountains until they could figure out what was happening. And when they realized what was happening, and this wasn't an exercise, this wasn't going away, they've been raided by the Russians and they're murdering people, then you go to work, right? And so that would be my plan, I guess, would be to secure my family if possible, and then figure out what's happening and get involved in the fight.
There's a line. You live in Texas, right?
Correct.
There's a line. There's a great line in the movie by Texas when that Air Force colonel, the pilot, is like kind of explaining to him what happens, and he says they got the whole Mexican Texas border on fire because of patriots like you. It's a great line in the movie.
Yeah. It's a great movie.
Oh, it's such a good movie. It's actually my favorite movie ever. I love asking. I've never interviewed one military guy who's not seen that movie and does not love that movie. So I do want to ask you some questions because you're an NRA instructor, and I want to know what your thoughts are on the massive push for more gun control at the national level. Obviously, at the state level, it's happening all over the country. And do you have any opinions or strong feelings about attempts to restrict weapons in America?
Sure. I think kind of on par with most of the people that understand them and use them accordingly, the majority of people that want to take these away don't know anything about them. And so it's kind of, if you don't have a vagina, you can't speak to our health end. Well, if you don't have a gun, don't tell me what I can and can't do with my gun. You're afraid of it because you don't understand it. That vehicle that you drive every day kills far more people than those guns do. But you're not even nervous behind the wheel. Why? Because you went to a school. Your parents taught you how to drive it. You had teachers teach you how to drive it. You took classes, and then you went out and you practiced, and you've practiced every day. Every time you go somewhere, you make a left turn, a right turn, you stop at a light, you learn how to function the vehicle. A gun is the exact same way. It's a tool. And when you are proficient with it and you understand that these things don't just walk out and start killing people, and you can use it in with morals and with self-defense as we intend to use them for, or with sports or hunting or whatever. It's not this scary murder machine or weapon of mass destruction. It's an arbitrary tool that can be used for good or evil, but without them in a world that they exist, no thank you.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and I think that last point right there is the point that I think people really need to understand. They're not going away. And do you really want to be the only one, or you or your family or your friends? You really want to be the only people that are unarmed, and then you're then hoping for the mercy of others.
Oh yeah. I mean, look at other countries that have done that. They talk about Australia a lot. Well, Australia is an island surrounded by the Pacific Ocean. We are not an island. We have the Mexican border, we have the Canadian border, we have all, ships that come in, which Australia has. But if they throw a hypothetical, if they had a magnet and they could wipe it across America and take every gun out of every person's hands, it would take Mexico 6 months to put it in the hands of every willing criminal again. They just start running guns. Whatever we prohibit is a market.
Right.
And they're going to fill that void because everyone knows what they are and people are going to want them. And it wouldn't be a good thing, I don't think.
I agree, and I have no doubt most of the people watching this agree. I got just a couple more questions. This has been a great interview. You're a fascinating dude.
Thank you.
This is something, again, that I really like to ask military guys because I feel like they have unique perspectives, sometimes that surprise people. But most importantly, in my opinion, anyone who's sacrificed on any level tends to be very grateful, or more grateful than just your average person. So when you hear people maybe say that America is a terrible place or that we're an evil country full of evil people, do you kind of cringe when you hear that? Like, what's your reaction when you turn on the news and it's just nonstop negativity around the clock about how awful this place is?
Well, I actually don't turn on the news anymore because of that. It
Smart.
it it's just, it's one, not true. And it's unbelievably toxic how that mindset, and hearing it all the time. Even if one, you believe it, then you go around believing that about your own nation all the time. Like that's a horrible way to feel
Right.
about who you is. They're not leaving, right? They're not finding a more noble country to go to. They're just staying here and they're sulking and they're spreading this horrible idea about how shameful we should all feel all the time. And I don't want to live that way, but I don't believe it. And so listening to it just pisses me off. I don't think that anyone is really able to say that with a straight face unless they have paid no attention to world history.
Right.
Like it takes a real level of ignorance of history to say that America is unique in its cruelty. Like it's just absurd. It's really, we're not void of it, but we are certainly not unique in it. I went on a bender around the time I went to Naked and Afraid because I felt like I could use these books to harness a better perspective and get me through the suffering that I anticipated. And they were recommendations by Jordan Peterson, who I like to listen to a lot of the things he says. He's a very interesting person as well.
Yeah.
But I read the Gulag Archipelago. I read Mao's Famine, Unit 731.
The old Japanese torture unit.
Oh yeah. I read The Making of, what was it? It was another German book about the psychology of how they got these German policemen to do murders who were just regular cops.
Oh,
And
yeah. I think I know what you're talking about. And it's about how like none of them opted out of it. Like they just all were
yeah,
okay. I know the book you're referring to.
yeah, man. And sort of the peer pressure involved, or the, how that happens. I read all of those books, and I'll be honest, it probably took me 3 or 4 months to get over them. Like Unit 731 with the Japanese torture camps was specifically difficult. The rape of Nanking, that was
Right.
another one. Holy hell. Like, how could you look at America and honestly believe, like, yes, we had slavery, but slavery was brought here because it was everywhere else, right? Like, this was the place everyone was going. We didn't invent it here, but we did get rid of it. And we killed a whole lot of people to do that. And I think that the people that say that, one, are either trying to be trendy and different, and they just don't understand what the hell they're saying. Uh, they're wildly ignorant of the world and mankind's history, because we're not unique in that. Like history's been conquest since the dawn of time. I actually feel like the invention of capitalism and fair trade and markets is what kind of ended the conquest. It still happens in some places, and we still use conquest in economic ways, but we're not raping and pillaging villages to steal resources like we were, at least. I don't listen to them, man, and I usually shut off that connection when people start to talk that way. It's like, you and I are on such different pages. I'm happy to finish this dinner or whatever we're going to do cordially and change the subject, but it's not a conversation I'm interested in having unless they're actually open to it.
Right.
But from what I've seen, they're not. They get super emotional, and then they just start calling you names. I'm like, all right, like you're not interested in anything but the way that you feel. And so,
And allow me to add something. We're not, I don't know when this is going to air, probably in a couple of weeks, but September 11th, 21-year anniversary passed not that long ago, right? Just a few days ago. And I think
yeah,
one of the things that always stands out to me, I'm 30 years old. I almost forgot how old I was for a second. When those planes hit those towers, you saw strangers, plenty of stories of strangers rushing to help other complete strangers. And a
yeah,
lot of them died doing it. A
yeah,
lot of people never made it home. And to me, that's what upsets me when I hear the America's a terrible place. It's like, no, it's really not, because, yeah, we have bad people and bad things have happened. But when push comes to shove, the fact that people are willing to die for people they literally don't know whatsoever in an absolute crisis, that is a spirit to me that if you can look at that and think this is a terrible country, frankly, you're an idiot.
Yeah. It's a really interesting cycle that we seem to go through. And maybe it's just the human nature. But when things are bad, we unite and we help each other, and we see a greater purpose in the utility of those relationships, and we build them and we put energy and effort into them, and we become a community again. And then when things are good and it's a little bit slow and there's not much going on, we consume our own like nobody else. Like, and
Sad,
so,
but it's true.
oh my God. It's like the Marine Corps was like, if I hadn't have gone to war, I would have probably started my Glock in the Marine, because there's nothing for them to do. They just sit around and fuck with each other. And it drove me insane. Like, give me a mission, give me somebody to fight, because then we're all on the same page. We have a common goal and a common thing to work toward. And I think people really thrive when they have that. But you take it away and you put them all in utopia and they'll kill each other over a paperclip.
Right. All right. Last question. Now, I
Go
end
for
my
it.
interviews with this question. It's a fun one. It's a hypothetical. It kind of gets the creative juices flowing.
Yeah.
All right. You're flying in a Black Hawk helicopter, you and 11 of your best military teammates that you ever had, and you fly through a time hole. It's 1943. You land smack dab in Germany, halfway between Switzerland and Hitler vacationing at the Eagle's Nest. Do you make a run for Switzerland, or do you and your 12 buddies try to take out Hitler?
Switzerland being the neutral country, like the
Correct.
places. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Oh, we go for Hitler all the way. Like there's no other way to answer that question.
you'd be shocked by not during interviews. I've heard other people claim with straight faces that they would just make a run for Switzerland. But I agree with you. There is no other way to answer that question.
Those people don't have 11 buddies that are gunfighters.
That's
Like,
a great answer.
if I made the run to Switzerland, I'd have made it alone. The 10 would go to it'd be going after Hitler. Like, yeah, there's only one answer, and the team would have taken it all the way.
What is the just to play off that, if you take 12 United States Marines, snipers, whatever they could be, or whoever it is, how much has combat changed since World War II? Like, what would be the skill gap between our best now and what existed in the 40s?
I think the gap is the equipment. And so back then they fought usually during the day. They called truces for holidays. They, had weapons that didn't have near the capacity or the accuracy or the range. These days now, what they had to do with companies, you could pull off with 4 men, calling in air assets or long guns, shooting out. I now teach at the FTW Ranch. It's a precision rifle school, and with these Kestrels and these rifles that we had, guys shooting clay pigeons at 1,100 yards. Like, you couldn't do that in 1940. Like, I don't even know if they had optics on their rifles yet. But now we have optics that shoot the gun for you. Yeah, it's really the technology that I think the wars drove, right? The Iraqi and Afghanistan war really happened at a time that technology was advanced enough that it really changed the battlefield 100%, from night vision, thermals, lasers, optics, the capabilities of the guns. You could change history with a 12-man team and the equipment that we have today, for sure.
That's a great answer. We'll leave it on that quote. Zach Benton, I would like to give you a huge thanks for coming on Outkick's American Joyride with me, your host, David Hookstead. This has been an absolutely fascinating interview.
Thank you, sir. It's my honor.